Ms. Vittel's was still breathing when they bound her wrists and put her in a bag.
They settled on just Mike. Denise likes the sound of being a widow much more than a divorcee.
Mr. Winchester picked up his gun and he shot Mr. Williams in the face.
In May 1997, Kirsten Hatfield disappeared from her bedroom in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Her mother discovered an open window and a few items outside, sparking a massive community search that lasted for years. Despite countless leads and national attention, no trace of Kirsten was ever found, and the case went cold, leaving her family trapped in uncertainty. For nearly 2 decades, the man responsible lived quietly just 2 doors away. His name was Anthony Palma, a construction worker who blended easily into the neighborhood, attending community events and maintaining a calm, ordinary life while the mystery remained unsolved. Then, in 2015, DNA testing from evidence collected at the scene finally exposed the truth. The samples matched Palma. He was arrested and later convicted of kidnapping and Kirsten, though her body was never recovered.
A moral compass, you want to say the politically correct things, but it obviously geared up a lot of emotions on my part. Creeped into Shannon's house, kidnapped Kirsten, murdered her, disposed of her body. He didn't live 2 doors down for many, many years without a conscience. You know, we were shocked, we were thrilled, and also heartbroken. And we're heartbroken by the fact that we may never know where Kirsten's been buried or what happened to her body.
Palma was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Years later, in 2019, prison officials found him dead in his cell, and his cellmate was suspected of being involved.
I can't imagine losing your child the way that she lost Kirsten, and then to find out the murderer, who did receive justice through our court system, has now been himself, and we still haven't found her body. So, you know, my heart goes out to that family and to everybody involved in the case, because there is no closure. It's still wide open for us.
For those who had fought for justice, the news reopened old wounds. Police Chief Brandon Klebs and Kirsten's mother both expressed that while justice had been served, true closure would only come the day her remains are found and finally laid to rest. In March 2024, 52-year-old Nadia Vittel returned to New York City to settle into her late mother's apartment on East 31st Street in Manhattan's Kips Bay neighborhood. She had recently been moving her belongings in and was last seen on March 12th, entering the building with her dog. But when she stopped answering messages and calls, her loved ones grew worried. 2 days later, during a welfare check, family members and police discovered her body inside the apartment, leading investigators to open a homicide case.
Nadia Vittel sent a photo of her Lexus parked near 206 East 31st Street here in Manhattan. She was in the process of moving into apartment 19A of that building, and she's seen on surveillance video arriving at that building along with her dog and belongings around 11:30 a.m. on the 12th. She's never seen alive again. Coats were piled on top of a bag on the floor in the closet, and when family members moved the coats aside, they noticed that the bag contained a body. That body was later identified as Nadia Vittel.
Detectives soon identified 2 suspects, 18-year-old Kensley Alston and 19-year-old Hallie Tajada, who had allegedly been squatting in the apartment without permission.
Defendant Alston said that Ms. Vittel's was still breathing when they bound her wrists and put her in a bag, which they hid in the closet.
Surveillance footage showed them entering and leaving the building around the time of Vittel's disappearance.
During their 9 days in Pennsylvania, they made multiple purchases at various locations, captured on surveillance video with Ms. Vittel's credit cards. They purchased a PS5, AirPods, clothing, food, and even a diamond ring.
Authorities say the pair fled New York in Vittel's car, later crashing it in Pennsylvania, where they stayed for several days and were caught using her credit cards for shopping. The 2 were arrested on March 22, 2024, and extradited back to New York, where they were charged with second-degree murder, burglary, robbery, and concealment of a human corpse. Both pleaded not guilty and remain in custody as the case continues through pre-trial proceedings. As of late 2025, no official trial date has been announced. In October 2023, a quiet apartment complex in Sleepy Hollow, Westchester County became the scene of a devastating family tragedy. Authorities say 41-year-old Fernando Jimenez, a Chilean national, went to the home of his girlfriend, Cristina Ramundi, where an argument turned into a horrific confrontation. Inside the apartment were Cristina and her 2 sons, Michael and his younger brother. When police arrived, they found one fatally injured and the other 2 suffering from serious wounds. The community was left in shock as a manhunt for Jimenez unfolded overnight, ending the next morning morning when officers found him hiding inside a real estate office in nearby Putnam County. Jimenez was taken into custody and later charged with murder, attempted murder, assault, and weapons possession. Nearly a year later, in November 2024, he appeared in Westchester County Court, where he pleaded guilty to 9 charges.
How do you plead, sir? Guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
The courtroom grew emotional as family and friends of the victims wept during the plea hearing. The judge accepted the agreement to spare the survivors from reliving the trauma in a lengthy trial.
Not having to preside over what will be a very lengthy trial, and not having to make the family of the victims and the victims who have survived have to come in here and relive this again.
Jimenez faced up to 75 years to life in prison, but was ultimately sentenced to 37 years, a decision that balanced the prosecution's request for 40 years and the defense's request for 35. His formal sentencing is set for December 2024, marking the end of a case that deeply impacted both a family and an entire community. On the night of October 24, 2025, police in the quiet town of New Canaan, Connecticut, received reports of a man shouting in the woods near South Avenue and Gertie's Road. Minutes later, officers got another call, this time from 20-year-old Sebastian Van Stockham, who told dispatchers that something terrible had happened at his home. When police arrived, they found Laura Williams, Van Stockham's 54-year-old mother, deceased inside their residence. Authorities said Sebastian immediately surrendered and was taken into custody without incident. Investigators later confirmed that Van Stockham, a 2023 graduate of New Canaan High School with no prior criminal history, lived at the home with his mother.
This was an especially violent murder. The victim was found bludgeoned to death and sustained extreme trauma to her skull.
During his arraignment in Stamford Superior Court, prosecutors described the incident as extremely violent, while defense counsel urged the public not to jump to conclusions, calling it a deeply tragic family matter.
This was a terrible shock. Nobody anticipated this or foresaw this. And at this point, there's an awful lot of loose ends. All I can say is it'd be premature for anyone to rush to judgment. Obviously, it's a tragic situation, and it's a family.
The chief medical examiner's office determined that Williams had from blunt force injuries, ruling the case a homicide. Van Stockham was charged with murder and ordered held on a $2 million bond. Police say the case remains under investigation, and they are working to understand the motive and any underlying mental health factors that may have contributed to the tragedy. It was supposed to be a night of joy and celebration in Fayetteville, North Carolina, a short drive to a birthday party that 3 E.E. Smith High School football players were excited to attend. On that October evening in 2025, 21-year-old Diamond Monroe was behind the wheel of a Honda Civic with the 3 teammates, John Elliott, Trevor Merritt, and Nicholas Williams as her passengers. Her younger sister, 19-year-old Destiny Ginwright, drove a Dodge Charger alongside her. According to investigators, the sisters were traveling well above the speed limit, reportedly engaged in a race along Rose Hill Road. In just a few moments, Monroe's car lost control and crashed, ending in a scene that left the community heartbroken. In the days that followed, Fayetteville mourned deeply. Vigils were held at the high school football field, where friends and coaches remembered the 3 girls as talented athletes and kind-hearted classmates.
Allegation is they were racing a willful speed competition on the roadway out at Rose Hill Road. 3 young lives were lost, and they did not have to be, but for some decisions that were made that evening. These are difficult cases because there's absolutely no winners in a case like this. It is a situation where there's sympathy, but there also has to be accountability for any criminal laws that may have been broken.
Destiny Ginwright faced several misdemeanor charges, including reckless driving and street racing, while Monroe, who was hospitalized in critical condition, would later face charges of involuntary manslaughter. The district attorney described the case as a tragedy with no winners, a painful reminder of how one impulsive decision can alter many lives forever. In August 2022, police in San Antonio responded to reports of a man found injured along a neighborhood road. The victim was identified as Luis Rosales, the boyfriend of Monica Vasquez. Investigators soon focused on Vasquez's son, 21-year-old Guyan Perez, who they believed was connected to the shooting. According to early reports, Perez and Rosales had a tense relationship after Perez accused him of mistreating a family member.
And it's also a possibility that Guyan was not close to a gun and did not hold it. It's a possibility, right?
Yes. Monica Vasquez may have discharged a firearm. handled a discharged firearm or was in close proximity to a discharging firearm. A secondary transfer could be, say, there was residue that was deposited on the surface and someone touched that surface and then had that GSR on their hands. There are a lot of different factors that could affect how GSR gets deposited, especially the environmental factors.
During the 2023 trial, forensic experts testified that no gunshot residue was found on Perez's hands, a discovery that initially appeared to support his defense. However, residue was detected on his mother's hands, raising questions about whether she had fired a gun, touched a surface containing residue, or simply come into contact with it while helping the victim. Experts explained that the absence of residue on Perez did not conclusively prove he hadn't handled a firearm, since particles can easily be lost or transferred. After hearing all testimony, the jury weighed the conflicting evidence and reasonable doubt in the case. In the end, they found Guyan Perez not guilty, closing a deeply emotional chapter for everyone involved. On the evening of July 4th, 2024, Corlear's Hook Park on Manhattan's Lower East Side was filled with families celebrating Independence Day. The joyful atmosphere turned tragic when 44-year-old Daniel Hayden, a substance abuse counselor and author of a sobriety book, allegedly drove his pickup truck into the park after being turned away from a nearby party boat for appearing intoxicated. Witnesses say his vehicle sped through stop signs and crashed through a fence before hitting people gathered for the fireworks. 4 lives were lost that night: Lucille Pinckney, Herman Pinckney, Anna Morell, and Emily Ruiz. While 7 others were injured, Hayden was arrested at the scene and charged with second-degree murder, aggravated vehicular homicide, and multiple assault counts.
I need justice for my daughter. Just want this man to rot in jail and they give him his 25 years.
During his trial, prosecutors highlighted the irony that a man who once taught others about sobriety had ignored his own lessons. In November 2025, a judge found Hayden guilty on all counts in a bench trial. His sentencing is scheduled for December 2025, where he faces a possible life sentence. On the night of January 5th, 2024, Suffolk County Police Officer Brendan Gallagher was on patrol along the Long Island Expressway when he spotted a speeding car. Behind the wheel was 29-year-old Cody Fisher of Brentwood, later found to be under the influence of alcohol and marijuana. Investigators said Fisher was driving over 100 miles per hour when his car collided with Gallagher's patrol vehicle. The impact sent the officer's car off the roadway, leaving him critically injured. Gallagher spent weeks in recovery, undergoing multiple surgeries and a medically induced coma as doctors worked to save his life.
Fisher continued to speed and then hit my vehicle. Due to the severity of my injuries, I have no clear recollection on what happened afterwards. Mr. Fisher sent my vehicle into a bunch of trees, which caused my vehicle to flip over onto its driver's side, sending one tree through both of my vehicle's front A-pillars, which one impaled me. Following surgery, I was placed in a medically induced coma and put on a ventilator.
Fisher was arrested at the scene and charged with vehicular assault and assault on a police officer. In October 2024, he pleaded guilty to all charges. During the emotional hearing, Officer Gallagher spoke about the lasting impact of that night, while Fisher offered an apology that many in the courtroom felt came too late.
Apologize to Officer Gallagher for my actions that day. I wish I could take it back.
I think he's just sorry he got caught. That's what whenever somebody gets caught, they're always sorry.
We're very pleased that this defendant admitted his guilt and will not be a menace to our roadways for the next decade.
That sentence was handed out by the court in this case, which we're happy about.
A sentence like this today and the aggressive prosecution of District Attorney Tierney's office show those people that there are consequences when you engage in that kind of behavior in Suffolk County.
Prosecutors noted that Fisher had also violated probation from a previous road rage case, reinforcing the need for accountability. Fisher was sentenced the following month to 10 years in prison, with 5 years of post-release supervision. Gallagher remains on medical leave but hopes to return to duty. In March 2025, the Riverwalk in San Antonio, usually filled with laughter and tourists, became the site of a tragedy that stunned the local community. One night at Cafe Olé, 20-year-old employee Delano Garcia was involved in a confrontation with his co-worker, 43-year-old David Alvarado. Moments later, Alvarado was found critically injured, and emergency responders confirmed his passing at the scene. The motive behind the incident remained unclear, though investigators suggested there may have been growing tension between the two colleagues in the days leading up to that night. Garcia was soon taken into custody and later indicted on a murder charge. In July 2025, he appeared before the 227th District Court for the first time since his indictment, marking the beginning of formal proceedings. Both sides were granted time to exchange evidence before trial. Café Olé issued a public statement expressing sorrow for the loss and calling the event an isolated tragedy. As of now, the case remains in its pre-trial phase, with no official court date announced. On New Year's Day, 1987, a 71-year-old French tourist named Jean Casse was mugged near Times Square and later died from his injuries. Within days, police arrested two boys, Eric Smokes and David Warren, accusing them of the crime. The case moved quickly, relying heavily on statements from other boys, who later revealed that detectives had pressured them into identifying Smokes and Warren. Despite maintaining their innocence from the beginning, both were convicted and spent more than 2 decades behind bars, Smokes serving 24 years and Warren 20 years, before being released on parole. After their release, the two men refused to give up their fight to prove their innocence. With the help of advocates and the Manhattan District Attorney's Post-Conviction Justice Unit, their case was reopened decades later. The reinvestigation found serious flaws in the original trial, including unreliable witness statements and mishandled evidence.
It's a bit of anger, but disappointment and frustration in how the system works.
I been know I ain't do nothing wrong, so that was just for y'all. Me and him knew from day one we ain't do nothing.
Sometimes we look at the system, we say the system don't work. But I would say, nah, the system work, it's just slow at working.
For I ain't do nothing, so it don't make no sense to take no plea. I know he ain't do nothing, so I'm gonna sell him out for something he ain't do. That ain't the type of person I am.
I don't want to lump all police and all prosecutors in one basket. You know, there's some people who really care about what they do, and there's other ones who doesn't.
I wanted my wife to be here, but unfortunately she passed away. But she's here in spirit.
On January 31st, 2024, a Manhattan judge vacated their convictions, declaring both men innocent. Now in their 50s, Smokes and Warren, still close friends, say their journey was long and painful, but clearing their names was worth every moment. They are now seeking compensation for the years lost, hoping their story inspires reform in a system that failed them for nearly 40 years. In July 2023, Genesis Dockery was spending the day at her caretaker, Crystal Michaels' home in Cumberland County, North Carolina, when a tragic accident occurred. While she and her younger sister were under care, an unsecured weapon in the house was accessed by Michaels' son, leading to an unintentional that cost Genesis her life 2 days later. The heartbreaking loss left the Dockery family devastated, believing that better supervision and firearm safety could have prevented the tragedy. Months later, the family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Michael and the weapon's owner, accusing them of negligence for failing to ensure the weapon was properly secured. As the grief deepened, tensions between both families began to rise. By early 2025, Genesis's father, Fawn Dockery, was accused of sending threatening and harassing electronic messages to Michael and her relatives. He denied the claims, maintaining that his words were misunderstood and driven by grief rather than intent to harm. In court, both sides agreed to enter mediation in hopes of resolving the issue peacefully. In April 2022, residents of Forest Hills, Queens, were shaken when 51-year-old Orsolia Gall, a mother of two, was found dead near a walking path close to her home. Investigators quickly traced the evidence back to her house, where they discovered signs of a struggle. Detectives soon identified 44-year-old David Bonola, a handyman who had worked for Gall's family and was involved in an on-and-off relationship with her, as the prime suspect. According to authorities, Bonola had gone to Gall's home late that night, where an argument between the two turned fatal. He then attempted to conceal what had happened before leaving the area. Days later, police arrested Bonola and charged him with second-degree murder, criminal tampering, and possession of a weapon. In November 2022, Bonola pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter as part of a plea agreement and was sentenced to 25 years in prison, followed by 5 years of post-release supervision. Mike Williams and Denise Merrill were childhood sweethearts who married in 1994. They built what looked like a happy and successful life in Tallahassee. Mike earned a strong income as a real estate appraiser, and in 1999, they welcomed their daughter, Ansley. They often spent time with their close friends, Brian and Kathy Winchester. Classmates from years earlier, Brian worked in insurance, and through him, Mike secured several life insurance policies totaling about $1.75 million. On December 16, 2000, the couple's 6th wedding anniversary, Mike woke up before dawn to go duck hunting at Lake Seminole near the Florida-Georgia border. He planned to be home early so he and Denise could leave for a romantic weekend away, but he never returned. Later that day, search teams located his truck and boat trailer at a remote landing. The next morning, they found his small hunting boat abandoned in shallow water. Over the following days, helicopters, divers, wildlife officers, and volunteers desperately searched the lake, hoping he had made it to a nearby island. But no trace of Mike appeared. Months later, only his hunting gear surfaced, a pair of waders, a jacket, and his hunting license. But still, no body authorities concluded he likely drowned in a tragic accident. Denise filed the necessary paperwork, and Mike was officially declared, allowing her to receive the full life insurance payout years past. Then, in 2003, Denise began a romantic relationship with Brian Winchester. Many found it strange Mike's best friend was now involved with his widow, but with no evidence of foul play, the mystery faded. By 2005, the two were married and had built a new life together. The case went cold, still officially labeled a hunting accident. Everything changed in 2016. Denise and Brian's marriage was falling apart. One night in August, Brian secretly hid in Denise's vehicle with a weapon, demanding they talk. Denise talked him down, escaped unharmed, and immediately contacted law enforcement. Brian was arrested and later sentenced to 20 years in prison for kidnapping, a turning point that pushed the truth into the open. Facing major prison time and the collapse of his life, Brian made a deal to cooperate with investigators. In 2017, he confessed that Mike never drowned. He was murdered. He claimed he and Denise began an affair in 1997 and decided they wanted to be together, but Denise didn't want the stigma of divorce. According to Brian, the plan was to make Mike's death appear accidental during a hunting trip. When their staged drowning attempt failed, Brian ensured Mike would never make it home and later buried him in a secluded area of Carr Lake outside Tallahassee. With Brian's confession, investigators went to the exact spot he described. After draining the area and digging carefully, they finally discovered the remains of Mike Williams nearly 17 years after he vanished. It proved this was never an accident. In December 2018, Denise Williams went to trial.
What you're going to hear is back in December 16th of 2000. Jerry Michael Williams, he goes as Mike Williams. He's an avid duck hunter. He likes to go out and duck hunt on a regular basis. On this particular day, he went out and did that very thing. He went to go duck hunting. You're going to hear that this is also the anniversary with himself, and at the time he was married to Denise Williams. This is their anniversary day. So on this particular day, there's a plan where he's going to go out, he's going to duck hunt, he's going to come home, and then afterwards they are going to leave and go to Apalachicola to celebrate their anniversary that evening and stay at the Gibson Inn and have dinner and things along those lines. You're going to hear that on this particular day, one of the places that he typically goes to is Lake Seminole, excuse me. Lake Seminole is about an hour to the west of Tallahassee, northwest a little bit. It's actually in Jackson County, which is the next county over from Gadsden. And that's where he goes. And actually where he hunts is over here on the west side of Lake Seminole, just around the area of Sneads. What you're going to hear is they never came back. He disappeared. In the afternoon hours, Florida Wildlife Commission are contacted as well as other family members, and they start trying to figure out where he is, and they go looking for him. And a landing right off of on the north side, on the west side of Lake Lake Seminole, they find his Bronco as well as a trailer. You're going to hear that large number of friends, family members, FWC officers, civilians, law enforcement, everybody converges on here and starts to try and find him. You're going to hear this right here is a little what they call a slide where you can launch a boat from. And then as you can see, this is an old, Lake Seminole is an old pecan farm that they flooded with a dam, so it's a reservoir. And as you can see, you have a lot of stumps in this particular area. The initial thought, of course, is that he possibly was running the boat out to go to his duck hunting area. He hit a stump, possibly was thrown overboard, boat went off, and they were hopeful to find him, maybe on this island back in here or something along those lines, and move on. You're going to have an opportunity to hear from a couple of the FWC officers that were there, one of which is Alton Renew. Alton Renew comes out there, and he's kind of the coordinator of this whole thing. And he kind of takes the lead on it, and they conduct a search. And what you're going to hear is it's a very methodical search. They do grid patterns. They have a helicopter up. You have dive teams from Montgomery County, Alabama. You've got Jackson County Sheriff officers that are there participating in this. And as I mentioned, you've also got friends and families that are participating in this search as well. Multiple boats are out there looking for him, trying to find him. As I said, helicopter from up above looking around. And again, keep in mind this is a Saturday, December 16th of 2000. And you're going to hear during the evening hours of that, a cold front came through, and it was actually around 70 degrees, a nice balmy winter day in Florida on the 16th. However, a cold front rolls through that evening. And you're going to hear that there's torrential downpours, and of course searchers aren't able to search during that particular time, and that there are huge downpours and the temperature drops dramatically. It's in the 20s the next day, in the teens, everybody's bundled up. Lots of fires trying to stay warm and things along those lines. But what you're going to hear is the following morning, they found Mike's boat. This is Mike's hunting boat, duck hunting boat. As you can see, it's what they call a canoe. It's essentially a canoe that's powered by a motor. It's got a long, what they call a go devil, I guess it is. It's a long shaft there with a propeller on the end to get it to move through. And the idea is it can move through these stump areas in very shallow waters. You're going to hear that they actually found that boat about 75 yards away from where they found the Bronco. It's another little cove that's in this particular area is where they found the boat. As I mentioned, it's an extremely extensive search. This originally started out as a search and rescue. They were hoping to find him. You will hear from Scott Dungy, who is a friend of the family, a friend of Mike's. Goes up in the helicopter with FWC and is looking out, trying to find him, hopefully on the islands that are in that area, maybe got thrown from the boat and was able to swim to safety and was just waiting to be rescued. As I mentioned, weather was a factor in the multiple ways that they do this search. What you're going to hear is, unfortunately, during that time period, they were not able to find Mike. Mr. Williams is still missing, and reality sets in. At this point, it's become a recovery operation. What you're going to hear is that they bring out search dogs. They're going to have probing poles, and what those are, PVC poles, where they take and they push them down and they try and find Mike's body. And they're trying to feel for things that give way a little bit as a body would, not a tree stump, which is obviously much harder. As you're also going to hear, there are divers that were involved in this particular search. The initial search lasted approximately 2 weeks trying to recover the body. Out there every single day, helicopters, dive teams, every single day for 2 weeks. Scaled back to a degree at that particular time, however, FWC was a constant presence there. They were always looking, did spot checks, as well as friends that were there until all the way until February, months later. It's kind of a picture of what we're talking about here, where you've got the Broncos found, the boats found. There's a tree stump here, a tree stump here, as well as all the other trees you saw at a ranger station across the way here. What you're going to hear is that at the beginning of the search, Scott Dungy did a polling thing that we previously talked about, and he got a little bit of a giveaway right in this area, right off that island they thought maybe he had swam to. And you're going to hear they put down bamboo sticks there to try and mark that particular spot. And a great deal of the search actually concentrated in this particular area. There's a hole there, if you will. It's a deeper area. Most of this stuff is about 4 to 8 feet deep is most of this particular area. However, there's a hole here, which is much deeper, 12-foot range. That's where he felt that initial giveaway, and that's where they concentrated the search on. And they marked it with initially with bamboo sticks and trees, and eventually that transformed into PVC pipes that they put down for a little bit more permanent aspect. 6 months afterwards, you're going to hear from Joe Sheffield, who is a person that goes out there and avidly fishes at that particular time. It's summer months now, and he's out there fishing, and he comes across a set of waders, and he's going to describe to you what those waders look like. As a result, search goes back. You're going to hear from Scott Dungy as well as Alton Renew, who is present. They sent diver down to that particular location, and again, they are back at that marker, that hole, that 12-foot hole where they felt the initial push, and they've marked with the bamboo sticks, ultimately the PVC pipe. And what you're going to hear is not only were the waders found, but there was a jacket found, a flashlight, and a hunting license. That hunting license belonged to Mike Williams. It's an Arkansas hunting license is what was found. These are the items that were found 6 months later. Well, the hunting license. It's a flashlight that's found. Flashlight was one of those mag lights. Was actually still functional. But what you're going to hear, unfortunately, at that point, Mike still has not been recovered, and the case goes cold. At this point, it is marked as a missing persons. There's been no evidence of any foul play in any way, shape, or form. It's simply a duck hunting boat accident. Body was never found. There were even theories of alligators possibly had eaten him. Fast forward to 2003. Brian Winchester. Brian Winchester is a lifelong friend of Mike Williams. What you're going to hear is that Brian Winchester, Denise Williams, a lady named Kathy Winchester, is now Kathy Thomas. They all went to school together at North Florida Christian. And you're going to hear that over the years, Brian and Kathy got married, Denise and Mike got married. They had couple things together. They'd go out and they'd go to concerts together. They'd go over to each other's houses. They even had kids roughly around the same time. Mike and Denise had a little girl. Brian and Kathy had a little boy. But following all of this, in 2003, Brian Winchester and Kathy Winchester are now getting divorced. And now Brian and Denise, Mike's widow, are now starting to date. There are suspicions, and law enforcement takes another look. Now keep in mind, this is not 2018. We're talking about 2000. Okay? We're talking about an investigation, and what we're talking about with records and things along those lines. This is the days of flip phones and Nokia phones. These are the days in which you still got phone calls at your house. You had the answering machine where you had to push the button and listen that you didn't have any messages from all your friends. Not today. Records back then, people called each other at the house. Home records, the phone records back then consisted of long distance calls only. Any phone records regarding the local calls, if you get the bill, and the bill would say local service, but it never gave you the breakdown of calls like we do now with the cell phones. You had to go back, and the only breakdowns you actually had were of the long distance calls. So phone records are much different than they are today. So we go back in 2000, we're trying to get this information. Also texting. Texting was back in the day where there's Nokia phones and flip phones. We didn't have the keyboards. You had to actually type out a text message, AAA, BBB, CCC, in order to get the letters, in order to get going. But law enforcement tries to get the phone records. It's too late. At this point, keep in mind, this was not a homicide investigation. It wasn't even a missing person or it wasn't a suspicious person's investigation. It was simply a boating accident. At the time of the event, nobody realized that we would get where we are today. This was a missing person investigation. As a result, it was not a homicide investigation. When they realized there were possible suspicious circumstances, and they reclassified it from a missing person to a suspicious situation, phone records have been purged. They only keep them for so long. What they were able to do is go back and get life insurance policies and life insurance information on Mike Williams. And what they found out is that Denise Williams was paid out $1.75 million as a result of it. She was the sole beneficiary, no one else. You're then going to hear in 2005, Brian and Denise get married. At this point, there are definitely suspicions going on, but there's no evidence other than what you've heard. And the case goes cold again. At this point, it's been reclassified as a suspicious death or a suspicious person, suspicious case, but nothing has developed. The years between 2012 and 2016, Brian and Denise start to get a separation. They buy a house for $650,000 off Lake Jackson, but they never live in it. They remain separated for 4 years. But in 2016, everything changes. In August of 2016, Brian Winchester, in the early morning hours, frustrated with the separation, frustrated with where the marriage is going, frustrated with Denise, crawls in the back of her car at her home. He does so with a firearm. He orders her to drive somewhere. Denise, you're going to hear, talks him out of going to that particular area and ends up going to a CVS pharmacy on the north side of town instead. Somehow she's able to do that. And you're going to hear they have a long conversation about multiple things, and you're going to hear from Brian Winchester, and he's going to tell you what they talked about. And what you're going to hear is they separate at that point, and Denise talks him into letting her go. And he does. And they're going to talk later on that evening is the plan. The agreement is she's not going to go to law enforcement. But she does. You're actually going to hear that David McCraney, who was the brother-in-law of Denise Williams now, is a law enforcement officer at Tallahassee Police Department. And he gets on the phone with her and talks her through what to do and takes her all the way to Leon County Sheriff's Department. On the phone with her the whole way. And she gets to Leon County Sheriff's Department. She reports that he was kidnapped, and now Brian Winchester is charged with kidnapping, aggravated assault with a firearm, and this carries a potential life imprisonment. In October 2017, Brian Winchester gives a statement to law enforcement and he confesses to Mike Williams. What he tells us is that prior to the death in 1997, there's a Sister Hazel concert at the Floyd's Music Shop, which is off Tennessee Street. The Tennessee Strip is commonly referred to right there by Florida State University. And there's a Sister Hazel concert, and they went in there, and they actually were there with a couple other people, including Mike. But that's when everything started with them. At that point, on that day, is when their starting and the relationship began, 1997, 3 years prior to Mike's death. He talks about the insurance policies and tells the law enforcement about these insurance policies. Interestingly enough, one of the insurance policies, there actually are 3 individual policies, one for $1 million, one for $500,000, and one for $250,000. Is that the $1 million policy was actually written by Brian Winchester himself. He was an insurance salesperson by trade. And about 6 months before his disappearance, or his murder, that Brian Winchester and Mike Williams talked about getting this particular policy and the amounts associated with it. And Brian's going to tell you the intention is that he's going to get this $1 million policy, and what he's going to do then is allow that $500,000 policy, which is the previous one, to lapse, but it doesn't lapse until March of 2001. What he's also going to tell you is that during that time period of writing that policy, there's discussions between him and Denise about how they can be together. Keep in mind, at this point, they've been dating for 2 years behind backs of Mike and Kathy, their respective spouses. So they talk about it for a long time. Different scenarios go. Denise didn't want to be a divorcee. From a North Florida Christian, very religious families, didn't like the stigma of being a divorcee. They talk about possibly killing both Mike and Kathy. There's a discussion about going out fishing on the boat offshore, and that somehow Mike and Kathy would fall overboard, and miraculously Denise and Brian would be the ones that were rescued and therefore be together. Brian says no. He says, I don't want to kill the mother of my child. Apparently his best friend is okay, but the mother of his child is not. So they settle on just Mike. Denise likes the sound of being a widow much more than a divorcee. A widow gets sympathy from the community, center of attention. And they talk about how to do it.
Prosecutors argued she helped plan the killing, financially benefited from it, and continued life alongside the man who carried it out, all while maintaining the image of a heartbroken widow.
Let me begin by saying that there is no dispute about the fact that Mike Williams was murdered. The evidence is going to show beyond any doubt that he was shot in the face and killed by Brian Winchester, a man he thought was his friend. Brian Winchester is not on trial. In fact, he's never even been charged with the murder. He's going to testify here as a witness, and there's an important part of that you haven't heard yet that will be in evidence, and I want to tell you about it, and that's the fact that he is going to be testifying under a grant of immunity. And what that means in this particular case, the kind of immunity that was given to him, is that he will be able to testify as he pleases about this without any fear that the state will be able to use that testimony against him. Now, the immunity agreement is such that the state can't even use leads or hints or clues that were developed from that testimony. So he has not been charged. And I think it's fair from the evidence to conclude that it's not likely he will ever be charged for this murder. But he's here as a witness, and he's going to testify that Denise Williams helped him plan the murder. And I will just say right now, I think the facts that were outlined by Mr. Fuchs about what Mr. Winchester says are fairly accurate. That's what I think he's going to say. That's not the issue you're going to have to decide. The issue you're going to have to decide is whether to believe him. His testimony in this case is, and I should say also that what, as the facts as Mr. Fuchs related them, are pretty much the substance of all of the evidence against Denise Williams. There isn't anything else besides that. Brian Winchester's testimony is totally uncorroborated. In plain English, there isn't anything to back it up. You're not going to hear evidence from a witness who said that he or she saw Denise Williams participating in the planning or the execution of this murder. You're not going to hear any witness talk about DNA evidence or fingerprint evidence. There's no tangible evidence or physical evidence to connect Denise Williams to this crime. No confession, no admission, nothing. All you're going to have to go on is the word of the man who actually committed the murder. Now, of course, you're going to hear testimony about Denise Williams and her family. Denise Williams and Mike Williams knew each other from childhood. They dated each other through junior high and high school and college. And they maintained a long-term relationship with the Winchesters, Brian Winchester and his wife, Kathy Winchester, who was then Kathy Thomas. The four of them were classmates together at North Florida Christian, and also they were classmates together at Florida State. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Williams got married in 1994, and by all accounts, they had a happy marriage. The evidence is not going to suggest any reason why Mrs. Williams would have been unhappy with her husband. Mike Williams was a good husband, he was a good father, and he was most certainly a good provider. You're also going to hear testimony from people who knew Mike Williams during this time period. His financial advisors, his friends, his insurance agents. There's not going to be any proof of any kind, no evidence that any of these people heard or saw to suggest that Denise Williams was having any sort of marital problem with Mike Williams. You're simply not going to see any evidence of that. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Williams had a daughter, Ansley, who was born in May of 1999. And a few months after that, Mike Williams wanted to investigate the possibility of increasing his insurance. And so he had some conversations about that with a financial advisor, a man named William Vic Gainey. Mr. Gainey advised Mr. Williams that he should have at least $1 million in life insurance. And so Mr. Williams, and I should point out that Mr. Williams also had a policy that was written by the Winchesters, and I say the Winchesters, Brian Winchester and his father, Marcus Winchester, were insurance agents, and they had sold Mike Williams a policy before, a smaller policy. So when Mike Williams got this advice from Mr. Gainey, he went back to the Winchesters to buy an additional policy. And Marcus Winchester did, in fact, sell him $1 million life insurance policy. And at that point, he was that policy, together with the two that he already had, he had coverage, insurance coverage in the amount of $1,750,000. But you're going to hear evidence that this was not too much insurance for a person in Mike Williams' financial situation. Mr. Williams was employed as a real estate appraiser with the Ketchum Agency, and he was earning $185,000 a year, approximately $185,000 a year. Denise Williams did not, there's no evidence that Denise Williams participated in any of these discussions about the insurance, and there's no evidence that she did anything to influence her husband Mike to buy this insurance. The only evidence you're going to hear on this point is that the matter was initiated by Mike Williams himself, with the advice of his advisor, Mr. Gainey, his friends, and with the assistance of two insurance agents, Brian Winchester and his father, Marcus Winchester. At this point, I'd like to give you a brief synopsis of what Mr. Brian Winchester's version of the matter is, how it came to be. He's going to tell you that he and Mrs. Williams wanted to be together, but that she was opposed to divorce for religious and personal reasons. She was not willing to get a divorce from her husband, Mike. And so, according to Mr. Winchester, they decided that the only thing they could do was kill him. This is what he's going to tell you. So they settled on a plan to have Mr. Winchester go out hunting with Mr. Williams, and Mr. Winchester was going to make sure that Mr. Williams was wearing these bib waders, and I don't know how familiar you might be with that, but it keeps the bottom half of your body dry if you're wading in the water. But he was going to make sure that Mr. Williams was wearing these bib waders while he was in the boat. And he was going to wait for a point in time when Mr. Williams would stand up in the boat, and then he was going to push him over. And the idea was that water would fill up in the bib waders, and Mr. Williams would not be able to keep his body above the surface to get air. That was the plan. So Mr. Winchester is going to say that Denise Williams' role in the plan was to give her husband, Mike Williams, permission to go hunting. And even by his own testimony, that's what he says her role was, to give Mike permission to go hunting. So they were supposed to go out hunting on December 9th, 2000, but my recollection of these facts, not my recollection, but my expectation about these facts is a little bit different from what Mr. Fuchs presented. I think what you're going to hear is that Mr. Williams called Mr. Winchester and said, "I can't make it." And then Mr. Winchester called Denise Williams and said, "Hey, what gives? We were supposed to go out on this. We were supposed to do this thing on this occasion." And at that point, Mr. and Mrs. Williams was reported as saying that she had gotten cold feet. Told her husband that he couldn't go hunting. So Mr. Winchester then revived the plan for the following week, and what you're going to hear in that interim week between December 9th and December 16th is that there was very little contact between Brian Winchester and Denise Williams. Virtually all of the contact was between Brian Winchester and Mike Williams. They set up the plan where to meet. They were going to meet at a gas station near I-10, and they were going to drive Mr. Williams in his truck and boat and trailer, and Mr. Winchester in his Suburban out to Lake Seminole. When they got out there, they launched the boat, got out into the water. Mr. Winchester waited for a point in time when Mr. Williams would stand up, and he pushed him out of the boat. But the plan didn't work out exactly as Mr. Winchester expected it to. Mr. Williams, as it turned out, was able to get out of the waders, and he started swimming back toward the boat. At that point, Mr. Winchester picked up his gun and he shot Mr. Williams in the face. The body started to sink. Mr. Winchester grabbed the body by one arm and pulled it up alongside the boat, piloted the boat with his other hand. This is the story according to Mr. Winchester. Piloted the boat with his other hand back to the shore. Then he picked up Mr. Williams and loaded him in the back of his Suburban. Went home. Later that day, Mr. Winchester went to Walmart and he bought a shovel and a tarp. And he took Mr. Williams' body out to Carr Lake just off Meridian Road and buried him in a shallow grave. Then he went home and he cleaned out his Suburban with some bleach. I preface this account by saying that this was Mr. Winchester's version of how this murder occurred. I think when you hear the evidence, you're going to have some questions about whether it happened, he said it happened, whether it happened the way he said it happened. But what I think is not in question is that it did in fact shoot and kill Mike Williams. And there's no evidence, absolutely no proof that Denise Williams had anything to do with that or that she even knew about it. Now, Mr. Fuchs mentioned that when Mr. Winchester was finally, I guess, apprehended, he said that he was having an affair with Denise Williams in the 3 years before the murder was committed. Well, he is going to say that, but you're also going to hear from law enforcement investigators who will tell you that they were not able to find any evidence of any affair. Two of the main investigators in this case were Tully Sparkman, an investigator for the state attorney's office, and Mike Devaney, who was at that time a special agent for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Both of these men worked on this case extensively. And both of them will tell you that they were not aware of any evidence, other than what Brian Winchester says, that Denise Williams was having an affair with Brian Winchester prior to December of 2000. So you're not going to see any phone records to verify that Denise Williams was calling Brian Winchester or vice versa. You're not going to see any security camera footage of them going in and out of buildings. You're not going to hear from any witness who said they saw them in a private setting. You're not going to see credit card receipts for dinners or hotel bills. What you're going to hear, and all you're going to hear, is that Brian Winchester claims he was having an affair with Denise Williams. Now, Brian Winchester was, of course, a friend of Denise Williams and also with her husband, Mike Williams. He and his wife, Kathy, went out with Brian and Denise on many occasions, and there were some occasions, the evidence will show, where Brian and his wife, Kathy, and Denise went out, just the three of them. But I think, if anything, the evidence is going to show that the relationship between these parties, the relationship that Denise Williams had with Kathy Winchester, was much closer than the one that she had with her husband, Brian. Kathy and Denise were close friends in the years, before and after Mike Williams disappeared, and they continue to be close friends for many years after that. And we're going to present some evidence in this case that is going to flatly contradict what Mr. Winchester says, that his claim that he was having an affair with Denise Williams and that they cooked up this plan to kill Denise's husband so that they could be together. The evidence to contradict that, two main things, and I'm going to go through them with you. One of the main things is that there is strong evidence in this case that Brian Winchester tried very hard to stay married to his own wife after the murder. And Denise Williams had a serious relationship with another man after the murder. So after 2000, I think several years after the disappearance of Mr. Williams, Kathy Winchester and her husband Brian were having some marital trouble all along, pretty much, I think, starting even before the disappearance of Mike Williams. But anyway, a few years after that disappearance, they were in more serious marital difficulty, I guess, facing a divorce. And you're going to hear evidence that Brian Winchester tried very, very hard to reconcile so that he could stay with his wife, Kathy Winchester. But Kathy Winchester was bent on getting a divorce, and she wanted to go through with it, and so they got divorced. She's going to tell you that at the final divorce hearing, Brian Winchester, the man who was supposed to have done this to be with Denise, was sitting in the back of the room sobbing, begging her not to go through with the divorce. He wanted to stay married to her. We're going to ask him about that. We're going to ask him to explain that. And the other thing I mentioned is that Denise Williams had a relationship with another man, that's a man named Charles Bunker. You'll hear from him too. That started a couple of years after her husband disappeared. Mr. Bunker was a co-worker, and that relationship developed, as many do, sort of in a more of a friend way to begin with. But then as it went along, it got more serious, and they had some things in common. Mr. Bunker was a single parent. He was caring for a child, and so was Denise. But during the course of this relationship, there were occasions where Brian Winchester threatened Mr. Bunker, and you're going to hear about that. On one occasion, Mr. Bunker went with Denise to Atlanta, on a trip to Atlanta, and Mr. Winchester showed up unexpectedly at their hotel room and threatened them both. Denise Williams tried to smooth things out with him to calm him down. But this went on for some time, and eventually the relationship between Charles Bunker and Denise Williams came to an end. Now, Mrs. Williams did eventually marry Brian Winchester, but that was 5 years later, 5 years after her husband disappeared. And the evidence that you're going to hear will put this in the proper context. She knew Mr. Winchester from high school and college. They'd been friends for many years. Mr. Winchester's son, Stafford, was about the same age as Mrs. Williams' daughter, Ansley. They were friends. Before the marriage, Denise Williams laid down some very strict rules. Brian Winchester had to be baptized. In fact, he was. Brian Winchester had to go through a year-long premarital program in Mrs. Winchester's church. These were conditions that Denise Williams insisted on before she married Brian Winchester. Now that marriage didn't end well. They separated in 2012 at Mrs. Williams' insistence, and in 2015, Denise Williams filed for divorce. There were many, many efforts on the part of Brian Winchester to save his marriage with now Denise Williams. He couldn't do that, and I came a point in time where she wasn't speaking to him. So in a final desperate attempt to save his marriage, he decided that he would kidnap Mrs. Williams. On the morning of August 15th, 2016, about 2:30 in the morning, he climbed into the back of her SUV, armed with a gun. I mean the cargo area of the SUV, armed with a gun, waiting for her to get up to go to work. She did eventually get up and go to work, get in the car, and when she realized that he was in the car, she screamed. Now, Mr. Winchester's going to say that he only wanted to talk to Denise Williams. He only wanted to try to reconcile. But he had a handgun, and you should also know that he had a tarp and 2 containers of bleach in the cargo area. He put them there. They weren't in the Suburban. He put them there. But he says he only wanted to talk to her. Now, fortunately, she was able to calm him down with the promise, I guess, that they were going to try to work things out. She had no intention of doing that, none whatsoever. She went straight to the police, and he was arrested for armed kidnapping. So we're going to present evidence in this case to show you that Mr. Winchester has a motive to lie to you, that he has a motive to make up this accusation against Mrs. Williams. He didn't mention anything about her alleged participation in this murder until after he realized that he was facing a life sentence for kidnapping. He didn't mention it until after he realized that Mrs. Williams was going to go into court and ask for a life sentence. And at that point, he made an agreement with the state for immunity. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to give you all the details about that in the trial. But just a thumbnail sketch of it, the agreement for immunity essentially ensured that Mr. Winchester would not get a life sentence, or that the state wouldn't ask for a life sentence on the charge of kidnapping. And it also ensured, guaranteed, that anything he said about the disappearance of Mike Williams could never be used against him. So that is what he gained by the agreement. In return, of course, he's going to give testimony, and the testimony he's going to give is going to be pretty much what Mr. Fuchs outlined about Denise Williams. There's one other aspect of this that goes to his motive, and I want to discuss it with you. It was not only a desire to get a much lighter sentence, or to get off of a sentence on the murder case altogether, for that matter, but it was also a sense of revenge, and there's evidence of that you're going to hear. We're going to ask Mr. Winchester, why he would make a statement like this against Mrs. Williams. And I expect him to say that he felt as though Mrs. Williams threw him under the bus by turning him in for kidnapping, and that he should now throw her under the bus. This is what I expect him to tell you. So that's the case before you. You're going to hear about the multiple investigations in this case. You're going to hear about the lives of all of these witnesses over the last 18 years. What you're not going to hear is any credible evidence that Denise Williams participated in this murder. On that point, you're going to have to rely entirely on the word of a murderer and a convicted felon. Now, we're going to have a chance to come back up and speak to you again at the close of all the evidence in the case. By then, you are going to have more than a reasonable doubt about the guilt of Denise Williams. And we are going to ask you then to find her not guilty. Thank you.
Defense attorneys insisted there was no physical evidence tying her to the crime and claimed Brian was lying to protect himself. The jury disagreed. Denise was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory after the fact. She was originally sentenced to life in prison without parole, but after appeal, the murder charge was overturned due to insufficient evidence of her direct involvement in the killing. Her sentence was reduced, and she is now serving 30 years in prison for conspiracy in her husband's death. Brian Winchester remains behind bars, serving his 20-year sentence for kidnapping Denise, his immunity deal preventing further prosecution for Mike's murder. Big thanks to our viewers for joining the courtroom journey with us. Your interest in the stories of justice is what keeps our channel alive.